What happens when logic meets supernatural? In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes confronts a legend that challenges him both intellectually and his skepticism about the unknown. In today's video, we will discuss all the major themes when it comes to The Hound of the Baskervilles. But first, who wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles, and how did it come to be?
Arthur Conan Doyle was born May 22nd, 1859, and passed away July 7th, 1930. He first started his career with an extended educational journey, which ended in getting his Bachelor of Medicine and Master of Surgery qualifications. During studying medicine, he began to admire Professor Dr. Joseph Bell and his ability to observe the smallest details in a patient condition. This is what led to the creation of the widely known character, Sherlock Holmes. After this, he served many different jobs, and ended up getting married and moving with his wife to London to become an eye doctor. Unfortunately for him, this was less successful than he thought, and he found he had not many patients and lots of time in this job to write. This eventually led to when he started to write his Sherlock Holmes short stories and novels. Shortly after the release of these stories, Sherlock Holmes became a very widely known character and was loved by the public. However, Doyle wanted to have the chance to write other works and separate himself from the character. He ended up killing Sherlock Holmes, which left the public heartbroken. After this, he continued to write different stories and novels, but nothing seemed to be as popular as his old Sherlock Holmes novels. Soon, Doyle caved to both financial and public pressure. He decided to bring back Sherlock with many novels, such as The Hound of the Baskervilles.
In order to follow the rest of the video, let's do a quick review of what the book is about. As wealthy landowner Sir Charles mysteriously dies, rumors spread about a curse of the supernatural hound that hunts him and his family. Hearing of this, Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes take on the case to uncover the truth of the curse in the hope of protecting the new heir, Sir Henry Baskervilles. As they continue working on the investigation, strange clues, odd noises, secretive characters surround the Baskervilles mansion. Holmes and Watson must use their investigation intuition to separate what's superstition from the truth behind the legend. The first key topic in this video is Gothic elements. The Hound of Baskervilles isn't just about detective stories. Doyle creates a world full of darkness, mystery, and fear. The three main elements that make it Gothic are the setting, the tension between science and supernatural, and the idea of a family curse. One of the strongest Gothic features is the setting. The moor in the back is the main background of the story, but it's not only the background. The moor symbolizes fear, isolation, and the separation from the actual world. The big field isolates people from the society, creating fear that something unknown could be waiting in the fog. Watson described it as, "It came with the wind through the silence of the night, a long, deep mutter, then a rising howl, and then the sad moan in which died away." Then Watson says, "The longer one stays here, the more does the spirit of the moor sink into one's soul, its vastness, and also its grim charm." These quotes shows the moor has psychological force to make people weak. John Pennington says, "The moor in fact fuses the scientific with the fantastic, the material with the supernatural," meaning that the moor is the place where it connects Holmes' scientific world and the supernatural legend of the Baskerville. Also, Clausen argues that the moor is the main symbol of the book. The moor and the mire imaginatively dominate the novel. Holmes tries to explain everything in scientific ways, but the fear of mystery in the moor keeps bothering them. The second Gothic element is the conflict between science and the supernatural. Sherlock Holmes represents science, logic, and truth, but Hound of Hell stands against everything he says. Holmes says the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. This quote perfectly shows his belief that every mystery has a logical solution. But when the hound shows up, everything changes because of the fear. A hound was an enormous coal-black hound, but not such as mortal eyes have ever seen. Even Holmes, who believes in science and logic, feels fear. Clausen writes, The Hound of Baskervilles is constructed around a series of binary opposition: science versus the imagination, reason and superstition. And the Gothic plot undermines the detective story's confident endorsements of science and the reason. These two quotes shows how Doyle intentionally uses science and the supernatural to create a Gothic story. Doyle questions the readers: can we explain everything with science? The final Gothic element is the family curse. This element is deeply connected with guilt and destiny. According to the legend of Baskervilles, it says that they are cursed by Hugo's scene. This quote says, "But it was not the sight of her body, nor yet was it that of the body of Hugo Baskerville lying near her, which raised the hair upon the heads of these three daredevil roasters, but it was that, standing over Hugo and plucking at his throat, there stood a full thing, a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye has rested upon." Clausen writes, just as Dracula emerges from remote and primitive past into modern civilized London, so the ancient curse of Baskerville returns to threaten the present inhabitants of Baskerville Hall. The curse of Baskerville family is not just a legend, it symbolizes fear. Dole shows that human can never escape the past through Baskerville curse.
The novel The Hound of the Baskervilles provides good insight into how fear impacts people psychologically and how it can be used to manipulate people, how fear impacts our interpretation and response, and how fear can impact people physiologically. Let's first consider fear as a tool of manipulation. In the article Fear Tactics in Psychology, Manipulating Emotions for Influence, it discusses how fear is a psychological weapon that shapes opinions and influences behavior. The article on page 3, paragraph 2 states that fear has this nasty habit of hijacking our thought process. When we're afraid, the emotion centers of our brain take the wheel, leaving our rational thinking skills stranded on the side of the road. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, the dark and twisted language is used as a form of manipulation to intentionally instill fear in the characters to lead to the relief in the family curse. For example, in Chapter 2, page 13 of The Hound of the Baskervilles, an ancient manuscript is presented to Sherlock and Watson detailing the curse of the hound. Standing over Hugo and plucking at his throat, there stood a foul thing, a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye has rested upon. The manuscript was a tool that perpetrated the curse of the hound and manipulated people into fearing that the hound would strike again. The second aspect of psychological effects of fear is the impact of fear on our interpretation and response. In the journal Frontiers in Psychology, a 2015 article named an intricate review of attention biases and their contribution to treatment for anxiety disorders discusses in part how fear impacts perception. The article notes on page 2 that anxious people display hypersensitivity in recognizing, processing, and responding to threat-related information. This confirms that fear can overwhelm us cognitively to the point that we are unable to respond to a threat. In Chapter 14, page 172 of The Hound of the Baskervilles, when Watson, Holmes, Lestrade, and Sir Henry confront the hound, they are full of fear, which impacts their ability to act. It says, Lestrade gave a yell of terror and threw himself face down on the ground. I sprang to my feet, my inert hand grasping my pistol, paralyzed by the dreadful shape which sprang out upon us from the shadows of the fog. The lore of the hound, which was built up as terrifying in their mind, combined with the dark and foggy surrounding, heightened their fear to the extent it paralyzed their ability to act. So much so that Inspector Lestrade threw himself to the ground and Sherlock could barely grab his pistol. Last, we examined the physiological effects of fear. The fear in response to the hound is ultimately revealed to be responsible for the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. The article, Psychological Stress and Heart Disease, Fact or Folklore, in the American Journal of Medicine, notes on page 689 that multiple reports support that severe acute psychological stress can precipitate myocardial dysfunction, infarction, arrhythmia, and cardiac death. The article also notes on the same page that acute psychological stress precipitating angina seems biologically plausible, mediated by a combination of coronary vasoconstriction and increased myocardial oxygen demand. This means that when something suddenly creates major stress in your life, it can trigger chest pain. In chapter 2, we get suggestions that this could be a fear-induced death. We see this when Dr. Mortimer notes on page 16 that Charles's death looked to be from cardiac exhaustion, quote unquote. Though the doctor's evidence pointed to an almost incredible facial distortion, it was explained that this is a symptom which is not unusual in cases of dyspnea and death from cardiac exhaustion. This combination with his suggestion on page 20 that Mr. Holmes, there were footprints of a giant hound, suggests that his death could have been fear-induced heart attack in response to being chased. The article also notes on page 689 that the most common psychological stressors include death of a loved one, violent confrontation or attack, extreme anger, profound financial loss, and natural disasters. This supports Charles's death being fear-induced, as the sight of the hound would have perceived to lead to a violent attack. Ultimately, in chapter 15, we find this to be the case. On page 182, Sherlock says Stapleton, quote unquote, knew that the old man's heart was weak and that a shock would kill him. In summary, the Hound of the Baskervilles describes how fear impacts people psychologically by making us easy to manipulate and altering our responses, and how fear impacts people physiologically, all which we know to be scientifically correct.
The last key topic in this video is manipulation. If you think of the characters in the novel, the one who embodies manipulation is Stapleton. In his thirst for power and his desire to obtain the inheritance, he chooses to manipulate others solely for the sake of fulfilling his desires. When discussing power from the standpoint of the article, rhetoric, ethics, and manipulation, in one sense, the urge to power can be identified as the urge to manipulate, and power can be defined as the ability to manipulate and control others. He lied to Laura to use her in his plans to kill Charles. Laura is in a vulnerable state due to her going through a divorce, and he uses this to his advantage to earn her trust by deceiving her when he presented himself as a bachelor, so he could easily get what he wanted from her. This fact is confirmed by Sherlock when he says, "You are aware, perhaps, that a close intimacy exists between this lady and the man Stapleton." Stapleton, as far as Laura knew, was an unmarried man she counted on no doubt upon becoming his wife. It is also relevant to consider that Stapleton manipulates his wife. His own wife mentions that, "It is my mind and soul he has tortured and defiled. I can endure it all, as long as I could still cling to the hope that I had his love. But now I know that, in this, also, I have been his dupe and his tool." She is a victim of domestic abuse, with Stapleton doing horrendous acts towards her to keep her quiet. As it says in the quote, she still loves him, but she finally realizes that he is just using her. This kind of treatment is not just in the imagination of Conan Doyle. This is a reflection of abuses that occur in society, with these kinds of abuses still occurring in the modern day. In an article by Chan, published in Focus on the Family in 2023 on spousal control, the author states, "The use of threats or ultimatums are some way a controlling spouse gets their way." Interestingly, the author also uses manipulation, this time on the reader. He manipulates his readers by purposefully placing red herrings to make them think somebody else is the killer. One example is a discussion held between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Mortimer. And Sherlock asks, "Did Barrymore profit at all by Sir Charles's will?" Dr. Mortimer replies, "He and his wife received £500 each." Sherlock replies, "Did they know they would receive this?" And Dr. Mortimer says, "Yes." And we know that, in fact, the Barrymores are not the killers. This conversation was placed for the sole purpose of keeping the reader engaged with the story. This is actually very common in this genre. In an article by Wordman titled, "Should Your Mystery Include Red Herrings? Let's Solve This." This article states that this story element is absolutely crucial in mystery writing. It is the secret to keeping your readers engaged, curious, and surprised. This surprise is the real goal of manipulation, to keep readers on their toes for who the real killer is. Another example in the story of red herrings is a mysterious murderer who escaped from the nearby jail. "There's a convict escaped from Princetown, sir. He has been out for 3 days now." Who is he, then? Selden, the Notting Hill murderer. This is mentioned to intentionally lead the reader to believe that he was the culprit of killing Sir Charles Baskerville, while in reality he had escaped and fled to that area to seek help from the Barrymores. Miss Barrymore says, "My unhappy brother is starving on the moor. We cannot let him perish at our very own gates." "Then your brother is," said Watson. Miss Barrymore replies, "The escaped convict, sir, Selden the criminal." In an article written by Emmett and Alexander, named Detective Fiction, Plot Construction, and Reader Manipulation, Rhetorical Control, and Cognitive Misdirection in Agatha Christie's Sparkling Cyanide, it mentions that the rhetorical control exercised by the author is such that the reader is encouraged to misapprehend the significance of the clues, and thus the narrative becomes a sustained exercise in cognitive misdirection. Another article which touches similar topics is Seago's Red Herrings and Other Misdirections in Translation, which says that the detective story promises that the reader will be given all the facts needed to solve this mystery, but in fairness, at the same time, the author will withhold information, mislead, confuse, distract. Even Sherlock himself manipulates others. This manipulation often occurs when he is investigating to determine who the real killer is. He tells Watson and Henry to "let Stapleton know you intend to walk home." Sherlock purposefully misleads Stapleton to lead him into a trap, ultimately catching the real killer. But Sherlock's plan ends up somewhat unsuccessful, with the Hellhound being killed, but Stapleton dying on the moor.
The Hound of Baskerville is a thrilling novel filled with mystery at every corner. As we follow Sherlock Holmes through the novel, we explore themes of Gothic literature, manipulation, and fear.
While reading The Hound of the Baskerville, elements of Gothic literature are revealed in setting, science versus supernatural, and the family curse. As one continues to dive into The Hound of the Baskervilles, manipulation is seen as a key theme. Manipulation is seen through the characters Stapleton and him manipulating Laura and his own wife, Sherlock manipulating Stapleton to take the bait and finally get caught, and through the author manipulating the audience through red herrings. We see the last theme of fear as both psychologically through manipulation and responses and physiologically.
This ultimately makes the book an extremely compelling read. Overall, this video helps show key themes and relevant information about the Hound of the Baskervilles.